The battlefield was lost, but the story was not finished. What remained was no longer an army, but a people, wounded, starving, carrying fragments of banners and memories. At their head rode the widow of the lion. The road ahead was cruel, yet from her tears a vow was born. At dawn, what remained of Imam Ahmad's host gathered not as an army, but as a caravan of grief. Women balanced infants on weary shoulders, the wounded leaned on shattered spears, and children clutched hands already calloused by war. At their head rode Fatima bint Mahfuz, the widow of the lion. Her robe bore stains of blood and rain, yet her eyes were fixed eastward, toward Harar. She gave commands not with a general's bark, but with a queen's quiet authority, placing guards at the flanks, assigning ox carts to the weakest, and entrusting precious manuscripts to steady hands. In her silence lay command, and in her presence the broken remembered how to rise. The road ahead wound through valleys darkened by suspicion. Once friendly villagers barred their gates, fearing vengeance. Scouts whispered of enemy riders stalking from afar, shadows that circled like wolves. Hunger gnawed, water grew thin, and each step tested the will of survivors. Yet Fatima forbade despair to rule them. "We are not destroyers," she told her guards. "We carry more than our lives. We carry memory." At her word, even weary men walked taller, for her resolve was shield enough against betrayal and hunger. She turned a march of fugitives into a pilgrimage of endurance. Among bundles of grain and weapons were others wrapped in leather, Qur'ans, volumes of law, books of knowledge rescued from the storm of battle. To some, they seemed a burden, weight slowing tired men. "Why not leave them?" they asked. But Fatima's voice was firm. "If the sword is broken, the book must remain. It is the book that raises new swords." In her hands, ink became as sacred as steel. Warriors who once thought of abandoning them now carried those volumes on their shoulders as if they bore their own brothers. To save the manuscripts was to save their people's soul, and she made it holy. One night, raiders descended from the ridges, howling into the darkness, seeking to scatter the caravan like sheep. Panic rippled through the wounded and weary. But Fatima did not falter. She mounted her horse and rode straight into the fray, cloak snapping in the storm wind, dagger gleaming in her grip. Her cry rose above the chaos, rallying the brothers of the sword who had survived. With her command, they struck the raiders with sudden fury, driving them into the night. At dawn, the wounded were tended, and the dead were buried with whispered prayers. "Even wolves cannot break us," she told them. Her soldiers murmured back, "The lioness hunts now." Days bled into weeks. The food grew scarce, fires burned low. Some nights, only a few crumbs of bread remained. Yet Fatima never ate more than the poorest widow, never warmed herself at a fire that was not shared. She moved among her people at dusk, placing water in the hands of children, binding wounds, whispering hope into weary ears. When despair rose, she spoke of Ahmad's last breath, of the Shahada whispered in rain. "His fire is in us," she told them, and in those words the caravan endured. Though the world seemed to turn against them, their unity grew stronger than hunger itself. Fear lingered with every nightfall. The howls of wolves, the whispers of spies, the emptiness of bellies threatened to unravel them. But Fatima commanded the song against silence. Around fires, elders recited poems of Harar, warriors pounded spears against shields, children repeated the Shahada until their voices shook the valleys. Their chants rose higher than hunger, louder than fear. Portuguese spies later wrote that they heard the echo of an army still marching. Yet what they heard was not an army, but memory, and it was she, the lioness, who had turned despair into music and silence into strength. At a swollen river, despair nearly swallowed them whole. Carts sank into mud. Manuscripts slipped into the current. Oxen flailed, children cried. Warriors despaired, shouting that the crossing was impossible. Fatima dismounted without a word. Barefoot, she waded into the current, robe dragging heavy with water. With her own hands, she steadied the oxen, lifted children onto her shoulders, and pulled the carts across one by one. Rain soaked her turban, mud caked her robe, but she did not falter. "The river is not the end," she told them. "It is the path to our home." On the far bank, men swore they would follow her until their last breath. The retreat stretched into months, yet each weary step pressed them deeper into legend. Fatima carried not a crown, but her husband's bloodied cloak. Around her moved soldiers who had lost battles, widows who had lost husbands, children who had lost fathers, but in her, none lost hope. She bore sacred manuscripts like treasure, guarded the orphans as her own, and held grief as if it were a banner. To some, she was sorrow made flesh. To others, she was a queen rising from exile. The Horn of Africa had seen kings and captains, but never a woman crowned by endurance. The road of ashes had become the road of legacy. Defeat had scattered their banners, but not their spirit. In Bati Del Wambara, widow became warrior, grief became flame, retreat became resistance. The long march through hostile lands did not break them, it crowned her. For though the Imam had fallen, the lioness now carried his roar.